The morning sunlight streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Victoria's pristine Denver home should have felt warm and welcoming, but something about the way it caught the steam rising from the coffee cup in front of me made my stomach clench with an inexplicable dread. My name is Emma, and at 32 years old, I had built what I thought was a beautiful life with my husband Michael and his family, never imagining that the people I trusted most were plotting something that would shatter everything I believed about love, family, and the lengths people would go to for success. Sweetheart, aren't you going to try the special blend I made just for you? Michael's voice carried that particular tone I'd been hearing more often lately, somewhere between affection and insistence, though his smile didn't quite reach those hazel eyes that had once made me feel like the luckiest woman in Colorado. We were gathered in around Victoria's imported Italian marble dining table for our traditional Sunday family brunch, a ritual that had become increasingly uncomfortable over the past few months, though I couldn't quite put my finger on why. The aroma wafting up from the handcrafted ceramic mug was wrong somehow, carrying an undertone that reminded me of the metallic taste that had lingered in my mouth after the mysterious illness that landed me in the emergency room just 3 weeks ago. The doctors at Presbyterian St. Joseph had run every test imaginable, but couldn't explain why I'd suddenly collapsed during what should have been the most important real estate presentation of my career, the one that would have secured the exclusive listing rights for the historic Beaumont Estate development project. It smells interesting, I replied carefully, watching the way Victoria leaned forward slightly from her position across the table, her perfectly manicured fingers wrapped around her own untouched cup of coffee. There was something predatory in her posture, like a cat watching a mouse, and I'd learned to pay attention to these subtle warning signs after too many accidents and unexplained illnesses that always seemed to happen right before crucial business meetings or networking events. Victoria had been in the real estate business for 15 years, building her reputation as one of Denver's most successful luxury property agents. And when I'd first started dating Michael 5 years ago, she'd seemed genuinely excited to welcome me into their close-knit family. She'd even offered to mentor me when I decided to get my real estate license, introducing me to her contacts and inviting me to shadow her at open houses. Looking back now, I should have recognized the way her enthusiasm cooled when my natural ability to connect with clients began attracting attention, when my fresh perspective and genuine approach started winning over buyers who had previously worked exclusively with her. Michael spent all morning earning per fee. Blend, Victoria said, her voice carrying that sugar-sweet tone that never failed to set my nerves on edge. He's been experimenting with different brewing methods, trying to find just the right combination to help with your energy levels. We've all been so worried about how tired you've been lately. The concern in her voice might have fooled someone else, but I'd become an expert at detecting the subtle undercurrents of satisfaction when she mentioned my recent health struggles. The past 6 months had been a nightmare of unexplained symptoms and emergency room visits that always seemed to coincide with important business opportunities. There was the severe allergic reaction during the Millennial Buyers Seminar, where I was supposed to speak about innovative marketing strategies for reaching younger luxury home buyers. The debilitating migraine that struck just hours before my meeting with the Zhang family, who were looking to purchase multiple investment properties worth over $10 million. The violent food poisoning that kept me bedridden for a week, while Victoria swooped in to help by taking over my scheduled showings for the Riverside Towers penthouse collection. Each incident had been explained away as bad luck, stress, or my body's way of telling me to slow down. Michael had been so attentive during my recoveries, bringing me soup and holding my hand through the worst of the symptoms, always gently suggesting that maybe I was pushing myself too hard, that perhaps I should consider scaling back my ambitions and focusing on smaller, less demanding properties. "You don't have to prove anything to anyone," he would whisper as he stroked my hair while I lay weakened and confused in our king-sized bed. "Victoria's been doing this for years. There's no shame in taking a supporting role." But I had never been content with a supporting role, not in my career and not in my life. Growing up in a small town in Kansas, watching my mother sacrifice her dreams to support my father's career, only to be left with nothing when he decided he wanted a younger model, I'd promised myself I would never depend on anyone else for my success or happiness. Real estate had given me that independence, that sense of accomplishment that came from matching families with their dream homes and negotiating deals that changed people's lives. The coffee cup sat before me like a test, steam curling up in delicate spirals that seemed almost hypnotic in the morning light. I could feel both Michael and Victoria watching me, waiting for me to take that first sip, and something primal in my gut screamed danger. Maybe it was the way Michael's hand trembled slightly as he reached for his own cup, or the fact that Victoria hadn't touched her coffee despite usually being unable to function without her morning caffeine fix. You know what? I just remembered I need to make a quick call to the Hendersons about their offer on the Cherry Creek property, I said, standing up with what I hoped looked like sudden urgency rather than calculated movement. They're probably anxious to hear back, and I promised I'd touch base this morning. Do you mind if I use your office, Victoria? I'll just be a few minutes. As I pushed back from the table, I let my heel catch on the Persian rug that Victoria had spent $20,000 importing from Iran, stumbling forward in what appeared to be a clumsy accident. My hands shot out to steady myself, and in the process, I managed to switch my coffee cup with Victoria's in a movement so smooth that even I was impressed with my own sleight of hand. "Oh my goodness, I'm so sorry!" I exclaimed, making a show of checking that nothing had spilled on the priceless rug. These new heels are taking some getting used to. I'm such a disaster sometimes. Victoria's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but she forced a laugh that sounded like breaking glass. No harm done, dear. Just try not to destroy my office while you're in there. Some of us value our possessions. The barb was subtle but effective, reminding me once again that I was an outsider in her perfectly curated world, no matter how many family dinners I attended or how deeply I loved her brother. I escaped to the office, but positioned myself where I could see the dining room through the French doors. My heart was hammering against my ribs as I pretended to dial a number on my phone, watching as Victoria absently lifted what she believed was her own coffee cup to her lips. Part of me wanted to run back in there and knock it from her hands to warn her that something was wrong, but I needed to know the truth. Was I being paranoid, seeing conspiracies where there were only coincidences? Or was my instinct correct that the two people who should have been my biggest supporters were actually working against me? The first sign that something was wrong came quickly. Victoria's hand began to shake as she set the cup down, her perfectly composed face suddenly draining of color. She touched her throat, a gesture of distress that sent ice through my veins, and I saw her lips form words I couldn't hear through the glass. Michael's reaction told me everything I needed to know. He leaped from his chair, knocking over the cream pitcher in his haste, his face transforming from confusion to horror as he realized which cup his sister was drinking from. "Victoria, what's wrong? Talk to me!" I could hear his panicked voice even from the office, and I quickly activated the video recording on my phone, holding it steady as I moved closer to the door. This was it, the proof I needed that my paranoia wasn't paranoia at all, that the man I'd shared my bed with for 3 years and the woman I'd looked up to as a mentor had been systematically trying to destroy me. Victoria was gripping the edge of the table now, her knuckles white with the effort of keeping herself upright. "Michael," she gasped, and her voice carried clearly through the house's perfect acoustics. "Something's wrong. The coffee. It tastes wrong." She swayed in her chair, and I watched my husband's face cycle through a series of expressions that told the story more clearly than any confession could have. Shock, recognition, fear, and then a terrible understanding that their plan had backfired spectacularly. "That's not your cup," he whispered, but in the silence of the morning, his words carried like a shout. "Oh God, Victoria, that's Emma's cup." "You drank from Emma's cup!" The admission hung in the air like a confession written in neon, and I stepped fully into view, my phone still recording, as Victoria slid from her chair to the floor, her designer dress pooling around her like water. "Should I call an ambulance?" I asked, my voice steady despite the chaos unfolding before me. "Or would you prefer to tell me exactly what was in that coffee first?" Victoria was on her hands and knees now, trembling violently, and the sight should have filled me with satisfaction. But instead, I felt only a hollow sadness for what we had all become. Michael knelt beside her, his hands hovering helplessly as if he wanted to help but didn't know how. "Call them!" Victoria gasped, her perfect composure finally cracking completely. "Please, Emma, call an ambulance. I can't breathe proper, Datsy." I was already dialing 911, my fingers steady despite everything. Because whatever they had planned for me, I wasn't going to let Victoria die on her imported Italian marble floor. The dispatcher's calm voice anchored me as I reported the emergency, providing the address and symptoms while keeping my phone positioned to capture every word of what came next. 911, what's your emergency? The dispatcher asked, and I forced my voice to remain clinical, professional, even as my world tilted on its axis. We need an ambulance at 4827 Belvedere Drive. My sister-in-law appears to be having a severe reaction to something she ingested. She's conscious but experiencing tremors and difficulty breathing. As I spoke, I watched Michael's face crumble, the reality of the situation finally hitting him with full force. "It wasn't supposed to be like this," he muttered, running his hands through his hair in a gesture I'd seen 1,000 times when he was stressed about work or family obligations. But this wasn't about a missed deadline or a forgotten anniversary. This was about attempted murder, and we all knew it. Victoria managed to lift her head enough to glare at him through her distress, and even poisoned and panicking, she had enough strength left for anger. "Shut up, Michael," she hissed through gritted teeth. "Just shut up before you make this worse." But it was already worse than any of them had imagined, because I had been suspicious for weeks, had been documenting every strange incident and unexplained illness, building a case I hoped I would never need to use. The universe has a strange sense of justice sometimes, delivering proof in ways we never expect. "Ma'am, help is on the way," the dispatcheress assured me. "Is the patient still conscious? Can you tell me exactly what she ingested?" I looked directly at Michael as I answered, watching the color drain from his face as he realized I was creating an official record of this moment. "I'm not certain of the exact substance, but my husband made coffee this morning that was specifically intended for me. My sister-in-law drank it by mistake. They may need to pump her stomach or administer activated charcoal." The sirens were already audible in the distance, growing louder as they navigated the winding roads of Victoria's exclusive neighborhood. She had chosen this house partly for its prestige, and partly for its privacy, never imagining that the isolation she'd cultivated would work against her when she needed help most. Michael stood up, backing away from both of us, as if physical distance could somehow separate him from what was happening. "Emma, you have to understand," he began, his voice taking on the wheedling tone he used when he was trying to talk his way out of trouble. "We never meant for it to go this far. It was just supposed to make you a little sick, just enough to keep you from—" Victoria's hand shot out, grabbing his ankle with surprising strength for someone in her condition. "Stop talking," she commanded, but the damage was already done. "Just enough to keep me from what, Michael?" I asked, my voice dangerously quiet as I kept the phone recording. "From succeeding? From taking the clients that Victoria thought belonged to her? From becoming the top agent at the firm she dominated for years?" The pieces had been falling into place for weeks, but hearing it confirmed still felt like a physical blow. Every supportive word, every loving gesture, every moment of apparent concern had been a lie designed to mask their true intentions. The paramedics burst through the front door, which I'd left unlocked in preparation for their arrival. They moved with practiced efficiency, immediately assessing Victoria's condition, while one of them peppered me with questions about what she'd ingested and when. I provided what information I could while maintaining my recording, making sure to capture Michael's guilty hovering and Victoria's continued distress. "We need to transport her immediately," the lead paramedic announced after checking Victoria's vitals. "Her heart rate is elevated and she's showing signs of potential toxicity. Do you know what substance she ingested?" I looked at Michael, giving him one last chance to come clean, to show a shred of the decency I'd once believed he possessed. He stood frozen, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water, unable or unwilling to provide the information that might save his sister's life. "I don't know the exact substance," I told the paramedic, "but I believe my husband would have that information. He prepared the coffee that she drank." The paramedic's eyes sharpened as he looked between us, clearly sensing the undercurrents of tension in the room. He made a quick notation on his tablet before helping to load Victoria onto the stretcher they'd brought in. As they wheeled her toward the ambulance, Victoria managed to catch my eye one last time. The hatred there was pure and undiluted, but underneath it, I saw something else. Fear. Not just fear of whatever was happening to her body, but fear of exposure, of consequences, of the perfect facade she'd built finally cracking beyond repair. "This isn't over," she whispered, but we both knew it was. Everything was over. The pretense of family, the illusion of support, the lies that had held us all together in this toxic dance. "I'll ride with her," I announced, surprising everyone, including myself. Someone who cares about her well-being should be there to provide information to the doctors. The irony wasn't lost on anyone, but I needed to see this through. Needed to make sure that whatever happened next was properly documented and witnessed. Michael started to protest, then seemed to realize that arguing would only make him look worse. The ride to the hospital was surreal, sitting in the back of an ambulance with a woman who'd tried to poison me, watching her fight against whatever substance had been meant to incapacitate or possibly kill me. The paramedic working on her kept shooting me curious glances, clearly aware that this was no ordinary family emergency. I kept my phone clutched in my hand, the recording safely saved to the cloud, evidence of a betrayal that cut deeper than any physical wound could have. Denver General Hospital's emergency department was bustling with the usual Sunday morning chaos: sports injuries, hangovers taken too far, and the occasional serious trauma that reminded everyone why emergency medicine was both vital and exhausting. Victoria was whisked away immediately, while I was directed to a waiting room that felt more like a holding cell, its beige walls and uncomfortable chairs designed to discourage long stays. I used the time to forward the recording to my email, my lawyer, and a trusted friend who worked in the district attorney's office, making sure that no matter what happened next, the evidence would survive. Michael arrived 20 minutes later, disheveled and panicked, his usual carefully groomed appearance abandoned in his haste. He stopped short when he saw me sitting calmly in the corner, my phone in hand, and my expression giving nothing away. For a moment, we just stared at each other across the waiting room, 3 years of marriage reduced to this silent confrontation between strangers who happened to share a history. "Emma," he started, taking a tentative step toward me, but I held up my hand to stop him. "Don't," I said quietly. "Whatever you're about to say, whatever excuse or explanation you've been rehearsing in the car, just don't. Save it for the police." His face went even paler, if that was possible, and he sank into a chair across from me, the distance between us feeling like an ocean of broken trust and shattered dreams. "The police?" he repeated, as if the concept was foreign to him. "Emma, come on. This is all just a misunderstanding. Victoria made the coffee too strong or something, maybe added something she shouldn't have. You know how she likes to experiment with those health supplements she orders online?" The lie was so transparent, so desperate, that I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. "Is that really the story you want to go with?" I asked, pulling out my phone and holding it up so he could see the recording icon on the screen. "Because I have your confession from the house, Michael. You admitted that coffee was meant for me. You said it was supposed to make me a little sick. Do you want to revise your statement before the detectives arrive?" The way his face crumpled told me everything about how poorly he'd thought this through. How he'd never imagined getting caught, because people like him never did. A nurse appeared in the doorway, her scrubs crisp and her expression professionally neutral. "Are you the family of Victoria Westbrook?" We both stood, and I noticed how Michael swayed slightly, whether from shock or guilt I couldn't tell. "I'm her sister-in-law," I said, stepping forward. "This is her brother, Michael. How is she?" "The doctor will be out to speak with you shortly," the nurse replied, her eyes flickering between us with obvious curiosity. "But I can tell you that she's stable for now. The activated charcoal seems to be helping, and we're running additional tests to identify exactly what she ingested. The police have also been notified, as is protocol with suspected poisoning cases." Michael made a sound somewhere between a gasp and a moan, slumping back into his chair as the full weight of consequences began to settle on his shoulders. I remained standing, feeling oddly disconnected from my body, as if I was watching the scene play out from somewhere near the ceiling. This man had slept beside me for over 1,000 nights, had promised to love and protect me, had smiled while putting poison in my coffee. The cognitive dissonance was almost unbearable. "Suspected poisoning?" Michael's voice cracked on the words. "But it was just... we don't know." His fumbling attempt at denial was interrupted by the arrival of 2 police officers, their presence immediately shifting the atmosphere in the waiting room from medical emergency to crime scene. Day. The older officer, whose badge identified him as Sergeant Chen, took in the scene with experienced eyes that missed nothing. "I'm Sergeant Chen, and this is Officer Martinez," he said, his tone professional but alert. "We understand there's been an incident involving a possible poisoning. Who can tell me what happened?" I stepped forward, my phone still in my hand, grateful that my voice remained steady even as my world imploded around me. "I can, officer. My name is Emma Westbrook. The victim is my sister-in-law, and I have video evidence of what occurred." The next hour was a blur of statements and questions, of watching Michael being read his rights while still trying to maintain the fiction that this was all a terrible mistake. I played the recording for the officers, watched their expressions harden as they heard Michael's admission, Victoria's angry words about keeping me from something. The emergency room's consultation room became an impromptu interrogation room, with Michael's increasingly frantic denials running up against the solid wall of evidence I'd collected. "Mrs. Westbrook," Sergeant Chen said after taking my initial statement, "I need to ask you some difficult questions. Has anything like this happened before? Any unexplained illnesses or incidents?" I almost laughed at the question, but there was nothing funny about the pattern of poisoning that had been slowly escalating over months. Instead, I pulled out my phone again, opening the Notes app where I'd been documenting every strange occurrence, every emergency room visit, every important meeting I'd missed due to sudden illness. 6 months ago, I had what we thought was food poisoning after Sunday dinner at Victoria's house, I began, scrolling through my detailed notes. I was supposed to present to the Riverside Development Group the next day about their new luxury condo project. Victoria ended up taking the meeting instead, claiming she was just helping out while I recovered. The client signed with her that afternoon. Sergeant Chen was taking rapid notes while Officer Martinez watched Michael with the focused attention of a predator sensing prey. 3 months ago, I had a severe allergic reaction to something in the tea Victoria served at her garden party. I'd never had allergies before, but my throat started closing up and I couldn't breathe. The Hamiltons were there. They were looking for an agent to sell their estate in Cherry Hills. I spent the next 18 hours in the ICU while Victoria graciously offered to show them properties the next day. She's been their agent ever since. The pattern was so clear in hindsight, so obvious that I felt foolish for not seeing it sooner. But when you trust someone, when you believe in the fundamental goodness of the people you love, you find ways to explain away the red flags. You tell yourself you're being paranoid, that surely the people who claim to care about you wouldn't systematically try to destroy your life for something as petty as professional jealousy and financial gain. "Last month," I continued, my voice growing stronger as I spoke my truth, "I collapsed during the Colorado Homes Excellence Awards dinner. I was about to receive the Rising Star Award for Agents Under 35. Michael was the one who handed me my champagne that night. I remember thinking it tasted strange, but he said it was just a new vintage. I woke up in the hospital, and by the time I was released, Victoria had accepted the award on my behalf and given a speech about how she'd mentored me and how proud she was of my success, positioning herself as the reason for my achievements. That's not— "Emma, you can't think!" Michael's protests were weak, lacking conviction, the words of a man who knew he was caught but couldn't quite accept it. "Tell them about your anxiety, about how stressed you've been. Sometimes stress can manifest as physical symptoms." WebMD says. Officer Martinez cut him off with a look that could have frozen hell itself. "Sir, I'd advise you to stop talking until you have a lawyer present. Anything you say can and will be used against you." Deargate. Sarah Collins entered the consultation room just as Michael was being advised of his rights for the second time. She was tall and composed, with the kind of presence that commanded attention without demanding it. "I'm Dr. Collins, the attending physician treating Ms. Victoria Westbrook. I understand there are some questions about what she ingested." "Doctor, can you tell us her current condition?" Sergeant Chen asked, his pen poised over his notepad. Dr. Collins glanced at me, then at Michael, clearly assessing the family dynamics before responding. "Ms. Westbrook is stable but remains under close observation. We've identified several compounds in her system that are concerning, particularly a combination of substances that appear to be pharmaceutical-grade sedatives mixed with other agents designed to cause gastrointestinal distress." Pharmaceutical grade? I asked, a new piece of the puzzle clicking into place. How would someone even get access to those? Dr. Collins frowned, choosing her words carefully. These aren't medications available at your local pharmacy. They're typically used in clinical trials or research settings. Someone would need specific connections to obtain them, possibly through a medical or pharmaceutical professional. Michael's best friend from college was a pharmaceutical researcher. The realization hit me like a physical blow, and I saw the moment Sergeant Chen made the same connection. Mr. Westbrook, the sergeant said slowly, we're going to need you to come to the station for formal questioning, and we'll need a list of all your contacts in the medical and pharmaceutical industries. I want a lawyer, Michael said, the words coming out as barely more than a whisper. All his bravado had evaporated, leaving behind a man who looked smaller than I'd ever seen him, diminished by his own choices, and the weight of consequences finally catching up to him. That's your right, Officer Martinez confirmed. We'll also be getting a warrant to search your home and office. I suggest you cooperate fully. It tends to go better for people who do. As they prepared to take Michael to the station, I found myself studying this stranger who wore my husband's face. How had I missed the signs? Or had he always been capable of this, hiding his true nature behind charming smiles and calculated affection? The sociology major in me wondered about the psychology of it all, how someone could share a life with another person while actively plotting their destruction. Emma, Michael said, as Officer Martinez guided him toward the door. For what it's worth, I did love you once. Before things got complicated. I met his gaze steadily, searching for any sign of the man I'd fallen in love with at that charity auction 5 years ago. Things got complicated when I became successful, Michael, when I stopped being content to live in Victoria's shadow. That's what you couldn't handle. Not the complexity, but my refusal to be less than I could be. He had no response to that, and I watched as they led him away, his expensive shoes clicking on the hospital's polished floors with a rhythm that sounded like ending, like the final notes of a song I'd never hear again. The waiting room felt impossibly empty without him, even though his presence had become a source of danger rather than comfort. I sank back into the uncomfortable chair, suddenly exhausted by the weight of survival. Dakota! Collins returned an hour later with an update on Victoria's condition and more questions about what she might have ingested. I told her everything I knew, which wasn't much beyond my suspicions and the pattern of escalating incidents. She listened with the kind of focused attention that made me understand why she'd chosen emergency medicine, the ability to piece together puzzles when lives hung in the balance. The combination of substances we've found is particularly concerning, she explained, pulling up test results on her tablet. Individually, they might cause moderate discomfort, nausea, dizziness, temporary disorientation, but together, especially at the concentration we're seeing, they could cause severe complications, organ damage, respiratory distress, even cardiac events in someone with underlying conditions. So if I had drunk that coffee... I couldn't finish the sentence. The reality of how close I'd come to serious harm or death settling over me like a shroud. Dr. Collins's expression was grave as she nodded. Based on what we're seeing, you would have been in critical condition. Your sister-in-law is lucky she has a stronger constitution and that she didn't consume the entire dose. Even so, we'll be monitoring her for the next 48 hours to ensure there's no lasting damage. The investigation that followed was thorough and devastating in its revelations. The police found a hidden compartment in Michael's home office, containing detailed notes about various substances and their effects, along with a journal documenting each incident with clinical precision. The entries read like a science experiment, noting dosages, delivery methods, and observed results with a detachment that chilled me to the bone. March 15th, 2 ml of compound B in evening tea. E experienced moderate nausea and dizziness within 30 minutes. Effects lasted approximately 4 hours. Missed Henderson property showing as intended. V successfully acquired listing. April 22nd. Increased dosage to 3 ml mixed with compound C in champagne. E's reaction more severe than anticipated. Hospitalization required. Award ceremony disruption successful but raised suspicions. Need to be more careful with dosages. May 30th. New combination tested. 1.5 meals each of compounds B and D in morning coffee. E showed increased sensitivity. Consider this blend for upcoming board meeting interference. Reading these entries in the detective's office, seeing my suffering reduced to data points in my husband's careful handwriting, I felt something inside me break and reform into something harder, stronger. They had turned me into an experiment, a problem to be solved, an obstacle to be removed. But in doing so, they had also revealed their own weakness, the arrogance of believing they could control everything, including me. Victoria's recovery was slow and complicated by what the doctors diplomatically referred to as patient noncompliance. She refused to provide information about the substances she'd helped procure, claiming memory loss and confusion even as her vital signs indicated full cognitive function. But the evidence against her was mounting, especially after investigators discovered a burner phone in her office containing text messages between her and Michael planning their escalating campaign. "She's getting too much attention," one message from Victoria read. "Davidson specifically requested her for the Meridian Project. That should have been mine." Michael's response was chilling in its casual tone. "Don't worry, I have something stronger from Derek's lab. One dose and she'll be out of commission for at least a week, maybe longer." Derek Garrison, Michael's college roommate and pharmaceutical researcher, was arrested 3 days after the initial incident. Faced with the possibility of losing his medical license and spending years in prison, he quickly agreed to cooperate with authorities. His testimony revealed a conspiracy that had been months in the planning, with Michael and Victoria carefully researching substances that would cause maximum disruption with minimal detectability. "They said they just wanted to level the playing field," Derek told investigators in a recorded interview I later heard during the trial. Victoria felt that Emma was taking advantage of her connections and training to steal clients. "They made it sound like they were just trying to create fair competition. I didn't realize how far they were willing to go until it was too late to back out." The real estate community in Denver is smaller than outsiders might think, and news of the scandal spread through it like wildfire. Former clients began reaching out, expressing shock and offering support. The Hendersons, whose Cherry Creek property I'd been trying to call about that fateful morning, were particularly vocal in their disgust at Victoria's behavior. "We specifically wanted to work with Emma because of her integrity and fresh approach," Mrs. Henderson told me over coffee a week after the arrests. "Victoria always seemed too calculating, too willing to say whatever she thought we wanted to hear." Other stories began to emerge as people felt safe speaking up. A young agent named Melissa revealed that Victoria had sabotaged her first big listing by spreading rumors about her professionalism. Another colleague mentioned mysterious illnesses that had struck competitors over the years, always at convenient times for Victoria's business. The pattern of manipulation and harm stretched back years, with Michael as her willing accomplice once he entered the picture. The trial was set for 6 months later, giving me time to rebuild my life and business while dealing with the emotional aftermath of such profound betrayal. I threw myself into work with a focus that bordered on obsession, partly to prove that I could succeed without anyone's help or permission, and partly to avoid processing the grief that threatened to overwhelm me in quiet moments. The house Michael and I had shared was sold within a week of him being formally charged, and I found a small but charming condo in a different neighborhood, somewhere without memories lurking in every corner. My lawyer, Patricia Brennan, was a force of nature who took personal offense to what had been done to me. "In 30 years of practicing law," she told me during one of our preparation sessions, "I've rarely seen such calculated cruelty between family members. They didn't just want to hurt you professionally, they wanted to destroy you completely." She was right, of course. The evidence showed an escalating pattern that likely would have ended in my death if Victoria hadn't accidentally consumed that final dose. The trial itself was a media sensation, the kind of story that made national news for its combination of family betrayal, corporate espionage, and attempted murder. I sat in the courtroom every day, facing my husband and sister-in-law across a gulf that could never be bridged, watching as the prosecution laid out their case with methodical precision. Michael looked smaller with each passing day, his designer suits hanging loose on his frame as stress took its toll. Victoria maintained her composure better, but even she couldn't hide the fear in her eyes when the pharmaceutical expert testified about the potentially lethal nature of the final coffee concoction. The defendants showed a clear pattern of escalation, the prosecutor argued in her closing statement. What began as simple sabotage evolved into attempted murder. They documented their crimes, celebrated their successes, and planned increasingly dangerous attacks on Mrs. Westbrook. This wasn't a momentary lapse in judgment. It was a sustained campaign of harm that only ended because Victoria Westbrook drank from the wrong cup. The defense tried to paint me as an ambitious woman who had disrupted a close family dynamic, suggesting that professional jealousy was natural and that the actual harm had been unintended. But the journal entries, text messages, and pharmaceutical evidence told a different story. When Derek Garrison took the stand and detailed how Michael had specifically asked for something that won't show up in standard hospital tests, any hope of painting this as a misunderstanding evaporated. The verdict came back guilty on all counts: attempted murder, conspiracy, theft of pharmaceutical compounds, and multiple counts of assault. As the judge read the sentences, 15 years for Michael, 12 for Victoria, I felt no satisfaction, only a hollow recognition that justice had been served, but nothing had been restored. The family I'd thought I'd gained, the love I'd believed in, the mentorship I'd valued, all of it had been an illusion designed to keep me close enough to control and harm. After the trial, I took a month off from real estate, something I'd never done before. I traveled to places Michael and I had planned to visit, but never had, seeing them now through my own eyes rather than as half of a couple. In Santorini, watching the sunset paint the white buildings in shades of gold and pink, I finally allowed myself to cry for everything I'd lost, and more importantly, everything I'd survived. When I returned to Denver, I found that my story had actually enhanced my reputation rather than damaging it. Clients saw me as someone who had faced adversity with grace and strength, who had maintained her integrity, even when those closest to her had lost theirs. The very success that Victoria had tried to steal through sabotage came to me freely, built on a foundation of authenticity and resilience that no amount of manipulation could destroy. A year after the trial, I stood at the podium of the Colorado Association of Realtors annual conference, preparing to deliver the keynote address. The irony wasn't lost on me. This was exactly the kind of honor Victoria had spent her career chasing, the recognition she had been willing to kill for. But as I looked out at the sea of faces, I realized that true success had never been about awards or accolades. It was about integrity, about building something real in a world full of facades. The most valuable property we possess isn't listed on MLS, I began, my voice carrying clearly through the packed auditorium. It's not a mansion in Cherry Hills or a penthouse in Lodoo. The most valuable property we have is our integrity, our ability to look ourselves in the mirror and know that we've earned our success through hard work, dedication, and treating others with respect. No commission is worth compromising that. No listing is worth losing yourself in the pursuit of it. The standing ovation that followed felt like closure, like the final chapter of a story I was ready to end. But life, unlike stories, doesn't really have neat endings. There are always new chapters starting, new challenges to face, new opportunities to embrace. As I left the conference, my phone buzzed with a text from a new client, a young couple looking for their first home. They had read about my story and specifically wanted to work with someone they could trust. Walking to my car in the Denver sunshine, I thought about trust and how fragile it could be, how easily broken, and how difficult to rebuild. But I also thought about strength, about the power that comes from surviving betrayal and choosing to remain open despite the scars. Victoria and Michael had tried to poison more than my body. They had tried to poison my faith in people, my belief in love and family, and professional relationships. They had failed. The coffee shop where I met the young couple the next day was nothing special, just a local place with good pastries and better coffee. But as I sat across from them, listening to their dreams about finding the perfect starter home, watching their eyes light up as they described their vision for the future, I felt something I hadn't experienced in over a year: pure, uncomplicated joy in my work. They trusted me with one of the biggest decisions of their lives, and I would honor that trust with everything I had. "We read about what happened to you," the wife said hesitantly as we wrapped up our initial meeting. "About your husband and sister-in-law. I'm so sorry you went through that." I smiled, and for the first time, it didn't hurt to acknowledge it. "Thank you. It was a difficult time, but it taught me valuable lessons about resilience and the importance of surrounding yourself with people who genuinely support your success. Now, let's talk about finding you that perfect home. As they left, excited and optimistic about their house hunting journey, I realized that Victoria and Michael had actually given me an unexpected gift. In trying to destroy me, they had revealed my own strength. In attempting to steal my success, they had shown me that real achievement couldn't be taken. It had to be earned. And in betraying my trust, they had taught me to value it more highly, to give it more carefully, but also to understand that the risk of being hurt was worth the reward of genuine connection. The Denver real estate market continued to thrive, and with it, my business grew beyond anything I had imagined when I first got my license. But now I measured success differently, not just in sales figures or industry recognition, but in the relationships built, the families helped, the integrity maintained even when it would have been easier to compromise. Victoria's former clients came to me one by one, seeking representation from someone they could trust, and I served them with the dedication she had never truly offered. Sometimes, late at night in my new condo, I would think about that morning at Victoria's house, about the moment of decision when I switched those coffee cups. Such a small action, born from instinct and self-preservation, had changed everything. If I had drunk that coffee as intended, I might not be here to tell this story. If Victoria hadn't revealed their plan in her panic, they might have tried again, might have succeeded eventually in their escalating campaign of harm. But those were thoughts for dark moments, and I had learned not to dwell in darkness. Instead, I focused on the light, the sunrise over the mountains visible from my bedroom window, the grateful smiles of clients holding keys to their new homes, the freedom that came from building a life based on authenticity rather than manipulation. Victoria and Michael were serving their sentences, paying for their crimes in concrete ways, but I had no interest in visiting them or seeking further closure. Some chapters were meant to end completely. Some people were meant to become cautionary tales rather than continued presences in our lives. 2 years after the trial, I received a letter forwarded by my lawyer. It was from Michael, pages of what I assumed were apologies or explanations or attempts to manipulate me one more time. I held it in my hands for a long moment, feeling its weight, remembering the man who had written it and the woman I had been when I loved him. Then, without opening it, I fed it into the shredder in my office. Whatever he had to say, I didn't need to hear it. My story had moved beyond him, beyond both of them, into something entirely my own. The young couple I'd met in the coffee shop found their perfect home 6 weeks later. A charming bungalow with good bones and better potential in a neighborhood just beginning to gentrify. As I handed them the keys, watching them embrace on the front porch of their new life, I felt the satisfaction that came from doing good work for good people. This was what Victoria had never understood in all her calculating manipulation, that success built on genuine service and authentic relationships was infinitely more satisfying than anything gained through deception. My phone rang as I was leaving their closing, a number I didn't recognize. Usually, I would let it go to voicemail, but something made me answer. It was a producer from a true crime podcast, wanting to interview me about my story for their series on family betrayals. I'd turned down dozens of similar requests, not wanting to relive the trauma for entertainment purposes. But something about this one felt different. They wanted to focus not on the sensational aspects of the crime, but on recognizing warning signs of manipulation and the importance of trusting your instincts. "I'll think about it," I told them, and I meant it. Maybe sharing my story in that format could help someone else recognize the danger signs I had missed, could encourage them to trust their gut when something felt wrong. Or maybe I would continue to keep it private, letting my actions and integrity speak louder than any interview could. The choice was mine, and after everything that had happened, the power to choose felt like the greatest victory of all. The Denver skyline glowed in the afternoon sun as I drove back to my office, the mountains standing sentinel in the distance, as they had for millions of years before any of our human dramas unfolded in their shadow. Life went on, business continued, families found homes and built dreams, and sometimes, unfortunately, destroyed them through greed and jealousy and the inability to celebrate others' success. But for every Victoria and Michael, there were hundreds of people operating with integrity, supporting each other, building communities based on trust rather than manipulation. My story wasn't unique in its broad strokes betrayal, survival, justice, redemption. But it was mine, earned through pain and fear, and the simple refusal to drink coffee that smelled wrong on a Sunday morning that now felt like a lifetime ago. Victoria had wanted my success, had been willing to poison me to get it. But what she never understood was that real success couldn't be stolen or transferred or taken by force. It had to be built, one relationship at a time, one ethical choice after another, one day of showing up with integrity after another. The coffee shop where I'd switched those cups had become something of a personal landmark for me. Sometimes I would drive past it on my way to showings in Victoria's old neighborhood, remembering the woman I had been that morning, suspicious but still hoping to be wrong, frightened but determined to know the truth. That woman had saved her own life through a combination of instinct and action, and I honored her by living fully in the life she had preserved. Success, I had learned, wasn't about being the best, or having the most, or winning at any cost. It was about being able to sleep peacefully at night, knowing you had earned your achievements honestly. It was about building something sustainable, relationships that would support you when you stumbled, and celebrate with you when you soared. Victoria and Michael had none of that now. Sitting in their separate cells, their carefully constructed worlds collapsed around them like houses built on sand. But I had built on bedrock: integrity, authenticity, genuine care for others. And while the storm they had created had shaken my foundation, it hadn't destroyed it. If anything, I had emerged stronger, more confident in my values and my worth. The clients who worked with me now got the best version of me, someone who understood that life was too short and too precious to waste on jealousy or manipulation or the petty politics of competition. The story could end here, with success and vindication, and the satisfaction of survival. But real life doesn't end neatly, and there were still moments when I woke up expecting to see Michael beside me. Still instances when I reached for my phone to text Victoria about a challenging client. Old habits dying hard, even when the people who inspired them were gone. Healing wasn't linear, and some days were harder than others. But on the hardest days, I would remember that morning, remember the choice to trust my instincts, remember the strength it took to stand in that hospital room and demand truth from people who had shown me only lies. And I would remember that I had won not by becoming like them, but by remaining myself, flawed and human, but ultimately unwilling to sacrifice my integrity for any amount of success. That, in the end, was the greatest victory of all. Victoria and Michael had tried to poison me, but they had only succeeded in revealing the strength I had always possessed. They had tried to steal my success, but had only motivated me to build something even greater. They had betrayed my trust, but they had not broken my ability to trust others. In trying to destroy me, they had only destroyed themselves. The sun was setting now, painting the Denver sky in shades of pink and gold that no artist could replicate. I pulled into the parking lot of my office, my name proudly displayed on the sign. Not because I needed the recognition, but because I had earned the right to claim my space in this world. Inside, messages waited from clients and colleagues, the daily business of building a life and career with intention and integrity. Tomorrow, there would be new challenges, new opportunities, new chances to prove that success and ethics could coexist. But tonight, I would go home to my peaceful condo, pour a glass of wine, and toast to survival and strength, and the simple wisdom of refusing to drink coffee that smells wrong. Some lessons were harder won than others, but the hardest often proved the most valuable. In the end, Victoria and Michael had taught me more than any mentor or training program ever could have. They had shown me the dark side of ambition, the cost of jealousy, the danger of trusting the wrong people. But more importantly, they had revealed my own resilience, my capacity for strategic thinking under pressure, and my unwavering commitment to building a life and career based on authenticity rather than deception. The coffee had been meant to poison me. Instead, it had set me free. But freedom, I would learn, was not a destination, but a journey, one that continued long after the courtroom battles ended and the newspaper headlines faded. 3 months after declining to read Michael's letter, I received another piece of correspondence that would change my perspective on everything that had happened. This one came through official channels, from a woman named Rebecca Morrison, who was serving time in a minimum security facility in Wyoming. Her handwriting was careful, precise, as if she had written and rewritten the letter multiple times before sending it. "Dear Miss Westbrook," it began. "You don't know me, but I know Victoria very well. We were cellmates for 6 months before she was transferred to a higher security facility due to behavioral issues. I'm writing because I believe you deserve to know the full truth about the woman who tried to destroy you." I sat in my office, the afternoon light streaming through the windows, and read Rebecca's story with growing horror and fascination. She had been Victoria's business partner 8 years ago, co-founding a boutique real estate firm that specialized in historic properties. According to Rebecca, everything had been perfect for the first 2 years. They complemented each other's skills, shared a vision for ethical business practices, and were building something special in the Denver market. Then Rebecca had gotten engaged to a wonderful man, gotten pregnant, and started talking about working reduced hours after the baby was born. Victoria's attitude had shifted almost overnight, becoming cold and calculating where she had once been warm and supportive. Small things started going wrong. Important documents would go missing. Meetings would be scheduled at times Rebecca couldn't attend. Clients would receive emails with incorrect information that appeared to come from Rebecca's account. "I thought I was losing my mind," Rebecca wrote. "The pregnancy hormones, the stress of wedding planning, trying to maintain my career. I blamed myself for every mistake, never suspecting that my best friend and business partner was sabotaging me." The situation had escalated when Rebecca had discovered she was having twins, meaning she would need more time off than originally planned. That's when the real attacks began. Victoria had started adding substances to Rebecca's herbal tea, claiming they were natural supplements to help with morning sickness. Instead, they made her violently ill, causing her to miss crucial meetings and lose credibility with clients. When Rebecca had finally grown suspicious and had the tea tested, she discovered a cocktail of herbs that, while technically legal, were known to cause severe reactions in pregnant women. The stress and illness had contributed to premature labor, and while her twins had survived, they had spent months in the NICU. "I lost everything," Rebecca's letter continued. "My business, my reputation, my health, nearly my babies." Victoria took over the firm, claiming I had abandoned my responsibilities. By the time I was able to fight back, she had destroyed my credibility so thoroughly that no one believed me. I ended up here not because of what Victoria did to me, but because of what I did in response. I broke into her office trying to find evidence, violated a restraining order she had filed against me, made threats I shouldn't have made in my desperation for justice. Reading Rebecca's story, I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning in my office. The pattern was identical to what Victoria had tried with me: the gradual escalation, the poisoned beverages, the systematic destruction of a perceived competitor. But Rebecca hadn't had the advantage of catching Victoria in the act, hadn't been paranoid enough to switch cups on that crucial morning. She had trusted until it was too late. I wrote back to Rebecca, thanking her for her courage in reaching out and sharing her story. We began a correspondence that would last months, comparing notes on Victoria's methods, finding strange comfort in knowing we weren't alone in our experiences. Through Rebecca, I learned of others. A young agent named Carla, who had mysteriously developed severe allergies right before a major presentation. A competitor named Janet, whose signature coffee order had made her sick for weeks until she stopped going to the cafe near Victoria's office. The network of Victoria's victims was larger than anyone had realized, spanning years and leaving broken careers in its wake. But there was something else in these stories, something that gave me hope. Each woman had rebuilt in her own way. Carla had moved to another city and started fresh, building a successful practice in commercial real estate. Janet had pivoted to property management and now owned a thriving company. Even Rebecca, despite her incarceration, had completed her real estate license renewal and was planning to start over when she was released. We formed an informal support group, communicating through letters and emails, sharing our stories and our strategies for healing. It was through this network that I learned Michael hadn't been Victoria's first accomplice. There had been others over the years, men and women she had manipulated into helping her schemes. People who had been discarded once they were no longer useful or had grown uncomfortable with her methods. Some had tried to report her, but without proof. Their claims had been dismissed as sour grapes from failed business relationships. The more I learned, the more I realized how fortunate I had been to escape with my health and career intact. But with that realization came a sense of responsibility. I had the platform and credibility that Rebecca and others had lost. I had evidence and a conviction that gave weight to my words. What was I going to do with that power? The decision to speak publicly about coercive control and manipulation in professional settings wasn't easy. The real estate community in Denver was still recovering from the scandal, and many preferred to treat it as an isolated incident rather than examining the systemic issues that had allowed Victoria to operate unchecked for so long. But silence had protected her for years, and I was done being silent. I started small, speaking at a women's business luncheon about recognizing the signs of professional sabotage. The room was packed, and the question and answer session went an hour over schedule as woman after woman shared stories of mysterious illnesses before big presentations, of trusted colleagues who had turned competitive in toxic ways, of gaslighting that made them question their own perceptions and abilities. It was clear that Victoria wasn't unique. She was just the one who had finally been caught. The talk led to another invitation, then another. Soon I was traveling across Colorado, then to neighboring states, speaking about workplace manipulation and the importance of trusting your instincts. I partnered with a psychologist who specialized in coercive control to develop a framework for recognizing and responding to professional sabotage. We called it the trust model. Take note of patterns, recognize physical symptoms, understand manipulation tactics, seek documentation, tell someone you trust. 6 months into this unexpected advocacy role, I received a call that would test everything I had learned about forgiveness and moving forward. Michael's mother, Eleanor, a woman I had once called Mom, was in hospice care and had asked to see me. My first instinct was to refuse. I owed nothing to the family that had produced and enabled Michael's behavior, but something in the nurse's voice when she relayed the message made me reconsider. Eleanor was dying with regrets, and perhaps I could offer her the peace that her son had denied us both. The hospice facility was quiet and dignified, a place where life's endings were handled with grace. Eleanor looked smaller than I remembered, diminished by illness and the weight of her son's crimes. When she saw me, tears immediately began flowing down her cheeks, and she reached out a trembling hand that I found myself taking despite my reservations. "Emma," she whispers, her voice barely audible. "I didn't know. I swear to you, I didn't know what they were planning, but I should have. I saw the signs and chose to ignore them because it was easier than admitting my children were capable of such cruelty." Her words came in rushes between labored breaths, a confession years in the making. She told me about Victoria's childhood, about the competitive streak that had turned vicious when she didn't get her way, about pets that had mysteriously sickened when Victoria felt threatened by the attention they received. "I told myself it was just bad luck, coincidence," Eleanor continued. "When Michael started showing the same patterns, learning from his sister, I made excuses. They were high achievers, I said, ambitious. But ambition without conscience is just another word for cruelty, isn't it?" I sat with her for 2 hours, listening to her regrets and revelations, offering what comfort I could to a woman whose children had chosen darkness, despite her efforts to raise them right. "Can you forgive me?" Eleanor asked as I prepared to leave. "Not for them. I'm not asking that. But for my blindness, for the ways I enabled them without meaning to?" I looked at this dying woman, thought about the complexities of family and the weight of unintended consequences, and found that, yes, I could forgive her. She hadn't poisoned my coffee or plotted my destruction. She had simply loved her children too much to see what they were becoming. "I forgive you, Eleanor," I said, squeezing her hand gently. "But more importantly, you need to forgive yourself. You didn't make their choices for them." She died 3 days later, and I attended the funeral, despite knowing Michael and Victoria would be there, brought from their respective prisons under guard. We didn't speak, but I saw Michael's face crumple when he saw me in the back row. Saw Victoria's expression harden with the hatred that had become her defining characteristic. The funeral marked a turning point in my healing journey. Seeing them in chains, diminished and defeated, I realized that I had been giving them too much power over my thoughts and emotions. They were not masterminds or criminal geniuses. They were simply broken people who had chosen to break others rather than fix themselves. The real tragedy wasn't what they had done to me, but what they had done to themselves in the process. I threw myself back into real estate with renewed passion, but now I approached it differently. I mentored young agents, especially women, teaching them not just about contracts and negotiations, but about maintaining their integrity in a competitive field. I developed a workshop on professional boundaries and self-protection that became required training at several major firms. The girl from small-town Kansas, who had once been content to live in others' shadows, had become a voice for those still finding their own light. One particularly meaningful moment came when I was showing a restored Victorian home to a young couple. The wife mentioned that she had recently left a toxic work environment where her success had been systematically undermined by a threatened supervisor. "I heard you speak at the Denver Women's Summit," she said. "Your story gave me the courage to trust my instincts and leave before it destroyed me completely." Moments like these made every difficult speaking engagement worth it, proving that pain transformed into purpose could create ripples of positive change. The real estate market in Denver continued to evolve, and I evolved with it, adapting to new technologies and changing client expectations while maintaining the personal touch that had become my signature. The Beaumont Estate project that I had nearly died trying to secure became the cornerstone of my business expansion, leading to partnerships with developers who valued integrity as much as profit. Victoria's former clients didn't just come to me for my services. They came because they knew I would never prioritize my success over their well-being. 2 years after the funeral, I received notice that Derek Garrison, the pharmaceutical researcher who had supplied the poisons, was being released early for good behavior and cooperation with authorities. Part of his plea deal included substantial restitution payments to Victoria's victims, funds that Rebecca and others desperately needed to rebuild their lives. The check that arrived in my office was substantial, but I found I didn't want it. I had rebuilt without his blood money, and accepting it felt like giving him a role in my success that he didn't deserve. Instead, I used the funds to establish the Phoenix Foundation, a nonprofit organization providing legal and financial support to victims of workplace sabotage and professional manipulation. Rebecca, now free and rebuilding her own life, became our first success story, using foundation resources to start a property management company that specialized in affordable housing. Other victims followed, finding hope and practical help in an organization born from attempted murder but dedicated to professional resurrection. The foundation's work attracted national attention, leading to partnerships with universities studying workplace dynamics and manipulation. Researchers were fascinated by the patterns we had identified, the ways in which professional jealousy could escalate to physical harm when left unchecked. We funded studies on early intervention strategies and developed training programs for HR departments on recognizing signs of escalating workplace conflicts before they became dangerous. My personal life, which had been on hold during the trials and immediate aftermath, slowly began to bloom again. I started dating cautiously, hyper-aware of red flags, but trying not to let paranoia prevent genuine connection. There were false starts and disappointments, men who couldn't handle the baggage of my past, or who saw my success as threatening rather than admirable. But there were also good men who understood that strength forged in fire was something to be treasured, not feared. I met David at, of all places, a coffee shop. The irony wasn't lost on either of us when I told him my story on our third date, watching his face carefully for any signs of the calculated interest I had learned to recognize. Instead, I saw genuine horror at what had been done to me and admiration for how I had handled it. David was a civil engineer, someone who built bridges and understood the importance of solid foundations. He didn't try to fix me or minimize what had happened. He simply stood beside me as I continued to fix myself. Our relationship developed slowly, built on honesty and mutual respect, rather than the whirlwind romance I had experienced with Michael. David understood my need for independence, my occasional panic when coffee smelled strange, my instinctive wariness when people were too eager to help. He earned my trust through consistency and patience, never pushing for more than I was ready to give, celebrating my victories without trying to claim credit for them. When we finally moved in together, 3 years after that first coffee shop meeting, I chose the house and put it in my name only. David understood and supported the decision, recognizing that my need for security went deeper than legal documents. He brought his engineering skills to our home, reinforcing both literal and metaphorical foundations. creating a space where I could feel safe while remaining strong. It wasn't the fairy tale romance I had once believed in, but it was real and sustainable, and built on truth rather than manipulation. The speaking engagements continued, evolving from simple cautionary tales to comprehensive workshops on professional resilience and personal security. I collaborated with law enforcement to develop training protocols for recognizing systematic poisoning attempts, potentially saving lives through awareness and education. Each talk was emotionally draining but spiritually fulfilling, transforming trauma into teaching moments that could protect others. 5 years after that fateful morning at Victoria's house, I stood before another audience, this one composed of law students studying criminal justice and victim advocacy. As I looked out at their eager faces, I thought about how far I had come from the woman who had almost drunk poisoned coffee out of politeness and misplaced trust. These students would go on to become prosecutors and defense attorneys, judges and advocates, and my story would be part of the foundation they built their careers upon. The most insidious thing about coercive control, I told them, wrapping up my presentation, is how it makes you complicit in your own destruction. You doubt your instincts, explain away red flags, and prioritize keeping the peace over protecting yourself. But your body knows when something is wrong. That coffee smelled metallic because it was poisoned. My stomach turned because some primal part of me recognized danger. The lesson isn't to become paranoid. It's to honor those instincts and act on them, even when it seems easier to go along. During the question and answer session, a young woman raised her hand. "How do you trust anyone after something like that?" she asked, and I could hear in her voice that the question was personal, not academic. I thought about David, about the clients who had become friends, about the network of survivors who had become my chosen family, about Eleanor's dying wish for forgiveness. "Trust isn't binary," I answered. "It's not something you have or don't have. It's something you build in increments, with people who prove themselves worthy of it through consistent actions over time. I trust differently now than I did before, more slowly, more carefully, but also more deeply because it's based on evidence rather than assumption. The goal isn't to trust everyone, it's to become skilled at recognizing who deserves your trust and to what degree." After the talk, the young woman approached me privately. She was in an abusive relationship with a fellow law student who had been drugging her to keep her from excelling in their shared classes. My story had given her the framework to understand what was happening and the courage to seek help. We spent an hour discussing safety plans and documentation strategies, and I connected her with resources through the Phoenix Foundation. Moments like these made every painful retelling of my story worthwhile. As the years passed, Michael and Victoria became smaller figures in my rearview mirror, their power over my daily life diminishing even as their crimes continued to serve as cautionary tales. I heard through legal channels that Michael had been denied parole after getting into a fight with another inmate, his charm and manipulation tactics less effective in prison than they had been in the outside world. Victoria had been transferred multiple times due to behavioral issues, her attempts to manipulate fellow inmates meeting with harsh consequences that the professional world had never delivered. Sometimes I wondered what they thought about in their cells, whether they felt remorse or only regret at being caught. But those wonderings were brief, quickly replaced by focus on the present and future I was building. They had stolen enough of my mental energy. They didn't deserve any more. The best revenge truly was living well, and I was living extraordinarily well by any measure that mattered. The Phoenix Foundation grew beyond anything I had imagined, establishing chapters in 12 cities and helping hundreds of victims reclaim their professional lives. We partnered with major corporations to implement early warning systems for workplace manipulation, potentially preventing countless cases of escalation. Rebecca became our national director, her personal experience and professional recovery making her uniquely qualified to guide others through similar journeys. At our 5th annual gala, I looked around the ballroom filled with survivors, supporters, and success stories. Women and men who had been broken by jealous colleagues, manipulative bosses, and toxic workplace cultures had rebuilt themselves into powerful advocates for change. The foundation had raised millions for victim support and prevention programs, but more importantly, it had changed the conversation around professional sabotage, from whispered warnings to open dialogue and systemic reform. David proposed to me that night, not with grand gestures or public display, but quietly in the garden outside the venue, with words that acknowledged our journey and promised partnership without ownership. "I know you don't need me," he said, "but I hope you want me beside you as we build our future." I said yes, not because I needed rescuing or completing, but because I had found someone who understood that the strongest relationships were between two whole people choosing to create something together. We married the following spring in a small ceremony attended by those who had proven themselves true friends through the trials of the past years. Rebecca was my maid of honor, and my Phoenix Foundation family filled the seats where Michael's relatives would once have been. It wasn't the wedding I had once dreamed of, but it was perfect in its authenticity and the genuine love that surrounded us. No one got it mysteriously ill, no one tried to sabotage the event, and the coffee was thoroughly tested and delicious. Looking back now, 10 years after that morning when I switched the coffee cups, I can see how every painful moment led to something meaningful. The attempted murder, that should have destroyed me, became the catalyst for helping hundreds of others. The betrayal that should have made me bitter instead made me wise. The family I lost was replaced by one I chose, built on shared values rather than shared blood or convenient connections. Victoria and Michael thought they were poisoning my coffee, but they were really poisoning their own futures. They're still in prison, their appeals exhausted, their reputations destroyed beyond repair. Meanwhile, I've built an empire not of real estate alone, but of resilience, advocacy, and authentic success. The Phoenix Foundation continues to grow, the speaking engagements reach new audiences, and the real estate business thrives on a foundation of integrity that no amount of manipulation could shake. Sometimes, when I'm training new agents or speaking to survivors, I think about that metallic smell that saved my life. Such a small thing, a slight off note in a familiar beverage, but it was enough to trigger the instincts that Victoria and Michael had counted on me ignoring. They had believed I would be polite, compliant, willing to drink poison rather than cause a scene. They had underestimated me, and in doing so, they had revealed themselves. The story could end here, with success and vindication, and a life rebuilt on stronger foundations. But the truth is that healing continues, growth continues, and the work of transforming trauma into purpose never really ends. Every day brings new challenges and new opportunities to choose integrity over convenience, authenticity over manipulation, trust over paranoia. Some days are easier than others, but each day is a victory simply by virtue of being lived freely and fully. To the women who might be reading this, who recognize themselves in my story, who are sitting across from someone they love wondering why their coffee smells wrong, trust yourselves. Your instincts are not paranoia. Your body knows danger even when your heart wants to deny it. That small voice telling you something is wrong deserves to be heard, honored, and acted upon. You deserve to be safe, successful, and supported by people who celebrate your achievements, rather than plotting your destruction. The coffee was meant to poison me. Instead, it became the catalyst for a life more meaningful than I had ever imagined. Victoria and Michael gave me an unwanted gift, the knowledge of my own strength, and the opportunity to use it in service of others. They thought they were writing my ending, but they were really writing my beginning. And what a beginning it has been. As I finish writing this, sitting in my office at the Phoenix Foundation headquarters, I can see the mountains through my window, constant and enduring, as they've always been. But I see them differently now, not as barriers but as monuments to resilience, shaped by pressure and time into something beautiful and unshakable. Like them, I've been shaped by forces that meant to break me, and like them, I'm still standing. The phone rings. Another victim seeking help. Another opportunity to transform poison into purpose. I answer with the same words I use every time. Phoenix Foundation, Emma speaking. How can we help you rise? Because that's what we do now, all of us who have been tested by fire. We rise, we rebuild, and we reach back to pull others up with us. The coffee was poisoned, but we are not. We are the antidote, living proof that survival is possible and that success is the best revenge. My name is Emma, and this is my story. But more importantly, it's a story of all the women who have faced professional sabotage and personal betrayal and chosen to transform their pain into power. We are legion, we are learning, and we are no longer drinking the coffee without asking questions. The metallic smell that once signaled danger has become the scent of awakening, and we are all finally, wonderfully, powerfully awake.